Thank you so much, Polly, and good to see everyone at the webinar this morning. Thank you for taking the time to come and hear a little bit more about stories and our experience and share some of your own. So, as Polly mentioned, I'm Sophie, Listening and Learning Officer at CUF, and over the last 3 years, I have kind of held responsibility for our monitoring and evaluation and also our storytelling. And this has been a brilliant insight into the impacts that CUF projects are having across the country, and being able to visit those places, chat to people, hear more about their experience, and draw that into our learning as an organisation, our report writing, our fundraising, and our comms has been a real privilege. And just noting, as she's also on the call and will be sharing a little bit later, this is a conversation captured in the photo of me and Hayley from the Community Cafe, which is a place of welcome in St Ambrose Barlow Church in Birmingham. And that was a story gathering exercise last year. Brilliant, Polly, thank you. So just going a little bit on to the why of storytelling and some of our learning, or my learning, across the last 3.5 years doing this work. So, just starting with this quote, how listening to people's stories can change hearts and minds in a way that facts and figures cannot. I think as we reflect on experiences from our own personal stories, having the opportunity to share those, hearing the stories of others, I think that ability to connect with people, to the real privilege of hearing their insights and being entrusted with that, and then how we take that on to the next stage is something that we're really working on. And I know, particularly with that balance of quantitative data and qualitative data, for me anyway, it's certainly the qualitative that lasts the test of time with my memory, with people's personal experiences. So just noting a few bullet points below. Reasons for storytelling, and including this in your approach to maybe gathering some impact around a particular community project or piece of work you're doing. Just noting it's a brilliant way to communicate the passion, motivation, and impact of your work. The insights of those who are engaging with a project can be ones that you've recognised yourself as maybe a community lead or a project lead, but they can also have much more breadth and depth than we could maybe see from an overview of that project. So I think taking the time to listen to motivations, impacts, and drawing those in from guests and participants and their experience is a really powerful tool. Storytelling can also help funders and supporters to understand the need of your project, your expertise, and the change that your project is bringing about. I'm always conscious that for project leads, the actual delivery of the programme is the kind of prime focus and the top priority, but taking that time to actually gather some of the stories, I think, can be really helpful in sharing the journey of the development of your project or the program you're engaging with a potential funder, or just take an opportunity to reflect on how far you've come on a journey developing what was an initial project idea into something that is now meeting individuals in the community, and something that they are continually engaging with. What's that process look like, and why is it that they are coming back, and this how your project is having impact for them. Just also noting as well, inspiring your community and increase engagement and support for your project. Sometimes I think maybe in a more of a parish context, we might not be aware of some of the brilliant things that are going on within the parish until we hear a story about the impact that those things are having for individuals through either word of mouth or hearing something that they've put maybe on social media or another platform, or through other community leads. So a really brilliant way to inspire community and celebrate the positives in a local area such as a parish, and also encouraging the person telling their story and amplifying voices that need to be heard. I think storytelling can be a really brilliant tool to, as I noted earlier, just to connect, also to take the time to build those relationships with your participants and guests, maybe draw them even in to the next stage of their journey with your project. Maybe storytelling might form a part of building confidence and a participant or guest feeling like they are in a position now to maybe volunteer some of their time, or kind of continue, develop the journey that they are having through engagement with your project. So that's been a really brilliant thing that I've seen over the last few years, chatting to people who, from kind of guest to volunteer, storytelling and engaging with their project lead has been a real significant part of their journey through that. And then also recognizing the expertise of your participants. I think often there can be uh, assumption of, oh, kind of top-down approaches, or this is what people need, this is what we perceive that people are engaging with. But I think until you've really taken that time to understand someone's story and the motivations for engaging with the project, the impact that it's had for them, I think that position that we could be in as kind of project leads, to recognise that expertise of participants and share those journeys and stories to help other projects develop, or share those with local council, other organisations which may be slightly more top down in their approach. We have a brilliant insight through community storytelling and community projects. And just noting, for in this photo, this is Cheb, and she's a project lead at Place of Welcome St Barnabas Soup Kitchen in Leeds. It was really brilliant to do a storytelling exercise with her a couple of months ago, and I think through that stories exercise really gain a greater understanding of her expertise in terms of a network of surplus food in Leeds, and actually through her experience seeing kind of food being thrown out of various charities, various organisations, she had then established this approach through the St Barnabas Soup Kitchen, which is seeking to now become a charity to draw that surplus food into a community cafe space and meet the needs of the local community through a hot meal each week. So now just noting, as I said, with that kind of top-down approach and the insight that storytelling can give us. So noting that decision makers often have priority areas of support and focus, but may not have the direct access to the personal stories that smaller grassroots and community projects encounter daily. And through your relationships and community engagement, you may gain insights and experiences that demonstrate the real impact and necessity of your project, stories that people trust you to share. So just noting a few considerations through our story gathering process. Certainly in the why, we want to consider the language that we are using. We've done a bit of work on this internally in CUF, but just noting some of that language around hard to reach groups or voiceless groups. I think that language particularly can be quite othering. And I think if we are certainly to recognise the expertise in that participant guest group who are engaging with our community project, ensuring that we are considering the language in our approach to storytelling can be really helpful. I think Hayley will note it slightly later on as well. Instead of service user, terms like guest or participant, I think can be more inclusive, accessible, and encourage people to engage in that process of story gathering and share some more of their insights and experience. And building trust, certainly, I think from the community projects that I have visited who have engaged with CUF programs, certainly taking that time to build trust with a participant group, those groups that quote unquote may seem particularly voiceless in our society, taking that opportunity to build the trust, you realise very quickly that people often have a lot to say about what they've experienced, what they found helpful, and the gaps that they feel exist in service provision, in projects that are engaging the local community, and those insights are really valuable and very core to people's stories. And this, just a note here to the consideration of active listening, and just reflecting again on stories that people trust you to share. I think taking the time to sit down, speak to people about their experience and story, but then making it clear what it is that we intend to do with that story, who it is that we want to share that with. I think particularly to honour people's time, to not have this be a process that kind of ends in the sharing of the story, but rather in actually considering the impact that the insights that we have through engaging guests and participants in a story gathering process could have. And I think considering that process early on, prior to engaging people in the story gathering exercise, can be really helpful. So just noting here with voice and advocacy, at CUF, one of our key strategic objectives is sharing the truth of poverty, advocacy, voice and influence. And just noting it can be really helpful to see the approaches that other organisations have taken to story gathering when considering what might work in your own context. And just noting some reflections here from the NCVO, who note that when done well, storytelling can help to build trust with key stakeholders by sharing personal stories and case studies. It can increase engagement by connecting with people on a personal level, and it can also help to drive action. And just with consideration of that drive to action, noting the recent 2025 MHCLG policy paper of Pride in Place. And yeah, if you have a moment, I'd really recommend just having a flick through that. And I think really interesting in that Pride in Place policy paper, in which Near Neighbours, which is one of our CUF programmes, is referenced. This acknowledgement that for too long things have been quite top down, and actually the expertise is in the local, with people who are facing those challenges, which the policy paper, in this case in Pride of Place, is seeking to address. So just noting this quote, for too long, communities up and down this country have felt that their voices have been ignored by those in power. Residents in this case know best about what is needed in their neighbourhoods, but are shut out of decisions that affect them and the places they call home. I think interesting here from MHCLG, a real recognition of the acute understanding that individuals have in the local, and wanting to draw that into this particular policy paper. And then just noting finally a checklist in the why of storytelling. Before designing an approach to story gathering, we should consider, and hopefully helpfully, I've made these all P's, but we want to consider the people that we are seeking to engage and what the experience for them engaging with the story gathering process will be like. We want to consider programme impact, so how we can draw that story gathering exercise into something that celebrates the impact that our programme is having. What questions do we want to ask? We'll come on to that in the how of storytelling. And just noting with planning and project design, how will we ourselves as maybe project leads and those designing programs be influenced and open to maybe adapting or changing things based on the stories that those engaging with our project share with us. And then noting that extra step in active listening and policy and influence. Where will we take these stories to that next step to influence other key stakeholders in our communities?
Welcome everyone. Here in the Diocese of Bath and Wells, which is technically the area of Somerset, because we're a very rural diocese here, sharing our stories. Our strapline is actually living and telling the story of Jesus. So we're all about sharing our stories. And if I can just give an overview of how we can perhaps use our stories to illustrate what we do and the work that people are doing in parishes on the ground. So we do it often. We want encourage people to share their stories, to celebrate firstly what they're doing, both with ourselves and externally in our wider communities, but also to share experience. So perhaps you've got somebody that's up on Exmoor who might have a story, who might have used, well, for example, using the Growing Good resources that CUF have. We have had a very rural church in Goathurst, which is in on the Quantocks, and they were in their rural context, were able to share the story of how they'd used that resource and how they'd used it with their community, with others on the completely the opposite side of the diocese. They might not have met in person, but through those stories of how they'd used it, we were able to share experience and learnings and how other people might use that in their context, and also to bring people together. We were also able to share within their community and the broader community generally how that was having an impact in the church and the church community locally. So through using those stories, what we did was, if we gathered, CUF made a wonderful video, so we were able to share that. We were able to share it in various different contexts in terms of the story, telling the story of Goathurst, to encourage other churches to use the bring good resources. We could use it at diocesan synod, we could use it at deanery synods, we invited people to come and tell their stories to others in other parts of the diocese. We used it through telling the stories in our newsletters and on social media. And I think what happens is often when people see themselves reflected a little bit back through those stories, they think, oh, okay, so we might be able to use that here. They seem to be operating in a similar context to us, or even they look like us, their community looks like us, then we might be able to try that here. And those things seem to very much connect with people better. They remember those stories more. They retell those stories to others as well. And we find that that has a great impact right across the diocese, as I say, in people in different contexts and different parts of our Bath and Wells. And we say also we feel that the small stories that we tell are part of the greater story that we're also trying to tell, the story of Jesus out there. And all those small stories contribute to the big story that we're trying to tell. And that also, as I say, that works both internally with each other, but also externally. Those stories allow us to tell the wider community what we're doing and how we're coming alongside them and how we're supporting them and how we can work with them to support their communities and help to transform their communities. And that has certainly helped and to break down a lot of barriers, to make those connections. And one other thing I'd just say as well is those stories also help us to feel part of one diocese. So instead of us feeling that we're operating in silos a little bit, we're just doing a tiny bit here and somebody's doing a tiny bit there, somebody over there is doing something slightly different. It also helps us to feel part of a whole, that together we're living and telling the story of Jesus in a broader context as well. So hopefully that's a very kind of a whistle stop tour, but hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much, Hayley, for taking the opportunity just to share a little bit more about your experience. When I came to visit you at your place of welcome, the community cafe at St Ambrose, Barlow, and hear a little bit more about some of the impacts of your work. And just looking at some of the questions, if it's okay to ask just at the start, how did it feel to share the story of the community cafe during that place of welcome stories visit?
It's been a real honour to be involved in the storytelling, and it's a real credit to the Place of Welcome movement and also the warm welcome spaces. And none of it would be possible without our volunteers. No, everybody on here would know the volunteers hold it together. Our cafe is constantly evolving to meet the needs of our guests, and what we have created in the 3 years just completely blows me away. We took on can offer low price food to people as well as a warm welcome and refreshments and different activities. We do fortnight seated exercise. So the story is constantly evolving. We're adding extra chapters, adding footnotes. We've got different characters coming in, and it's incredible. It's snowballed. It really has. The support of the different places like near Neighbours and Place of Welcome and the Church Urban Fund. And then when people have been amazing, and then when you come in and say, "Oh, we've got people coming in to chat with you and like take some photos," people are like, "Oh, I'll put my best lippy on," and you can see they've made the effort, and it makes people feel seen, which I think is a real part of the movement.
I love what you said, Hayley, just about adding chapters on, and I think that's brilliant to hear. I know the impact of the community cafe has just been so important in a lot of people's lives. So thank you for sharing that. And I just wanted to ask, kind of did sharing your story during that experience allow you to reflect and consider things maybe you hadn't had a chance to kind of think about in the busyness of running the cafe, but also the things that you've been proud of?
Absolutely. It was lovely to actually sit down for that to do the story. I'm always the one running around checking everything's going, that the volunteers are okay. I think probably I'm more of a hindrance than a help some days. But it's definitely helped me stop and go, actually, we started, when we had Place of Welcome come in, we'd been there for about 18 months. And we'd already evolved so much. But now when I knew we were going to be chatting today, I thought, well, actually, it's been 3 years. What a change. We've helped so many people. We've achieved so much. We've been nominated for one group award and 2 individual awards in the last 2 years, which has been amazing. And for the people involved, people are like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And again, it gives them a sense of identity. Actually, yeah, I'm doing a really good job. I am managing on my own, or I'm managing with mom. And it just, again, it's allowing people to be seen. So it's been fantastic. It was lovely to actually reflect and stop, and then to see the photos as well was lovely. And some of the people have sadly passed away that are in the photos, but we've got them and we know they're there and they look happy. And we did share some of them with the family once they passed. And apply for the funding, tell them what you're doing. Get more people in of a certain age, or, you know, look for your neighbourhood network services if you've got them in your area.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hayley. I think something there certainly around kind of meeting a diverse group of participants, ensuring that the space is accessible, and then taking those stories to funders to celebrate what it is you're doing and the impact it's having. Thank you so much, Hayley, for sharing that. And I know everyone watching the webinar will be really interested in your story, and there's more you can see on the Cuff page about the work of St Ambrose, Barlow, the Community Cafe and Place of Welcome. Thank you, Hayley.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. So I think what came through really strongly for me there, and I think it's resonating with a lot of the other contributors that we've had this morning, is that stories are an opportunity for people to feel celebrated, an opportunity for people to feel seen, and also an opportunity for reflection on how a project has evolved and the successes of the project as well. So thank you, Hayley, for being part of that recording, and thank you for what you do as well through the project in Birmingham, and to your volunteers as well. So I'm going to hand back to Sophie now, who's going to help us think a bit more about the practical aspects of storytelling and story gathering.
Brilliant. Thank you, Polly. So I'm now just looking at storytelling, how, and a few tips for ethical and effective storytelling. So certainly with engaging and listening, I think it's really helpful to take kind of a set amount of time, often longer than you think, for sitting down with participants, allowing them as much time as possible that is available to share some of that story, and develop some of the impacts for themselves, an opportunity to reflect. Also, I think using a mix of formats can be really helpful as well. We want our story gathering to be as accessible as possible. So if that is someone's not comfortable with say photography, but would happily be involved in an audio recording or a video, or looking at different ways you can be a bit creative, maybe a photo essay, just ways in which people can engage with the storytelling process, reflect on their story, and what that looks like for them in a mixture of kind of more creative formats. Certainly clarifying the usage, where would this story go, what is the kind of intention for that final story write-up, providing information, certainly your own contact details, ensuring people can get in touch with you, and that can be really helpful as well with when you are providing information, just to ensure that the final kind of story master copy is co-produced and people are aware of what they finally signed off on. That is really important, and really helpful to do so through providing information in a information sheet alongside a consent form, giving a choice. Certainly we wouldn't want a story gathering or storytelling process to hinder anyone from accessing a particular space. So just ensuring that the story gathering can happen alongside the general running of the activity, or in a space that's slightly separate, to ensure that anyone who might not wish to feature or engage has no kind of hindrance to accessing that space as usual. And certainly obtain permission. I'll go a little bit more into a consent form process that might work for you in your context with story gathering. And considering there again who might want to share their story, and just a note to accessibility again, those who may be less confident but may like to participate may feel more comfortable in a pair. So I found particularly over the last 3 years, a volunteer and guest pairing can be really helpful. Potentially there's some impacts that a volunteer can see for a participant or guest they've known for a while that individual can't see for themselves, and vice versa. So I think speaking to people in a pairing that works and they know each other well can be really helpful to developing that story for both individuals and what accessing the space and the impact that has had for them. And then just noting, again, in the storytelling how, considering these suggested questions to ask when gathering stories, and these are all included alongside loads of other brilliant information in the CUF project planning and fundraising guide. So helpful, I think, just to shape that narrative. How do people first hear about the project? What motivated them to get involved? Have they built new relationships through this project? I think that kind of growth in connection and opportunity to meet new people and what that experience has been like is really helpful in shaping some impacts, particularly around connection that engaging with a project has had for an individual, if it works in that context. How has this project changed your life or circumstances? Have you gained any new skills or confidence through this project? Would you recommend this project to others? And if so, why? I think that can be a really helpful question to include upon recommendation of why it is that people would encourage others to engage with that project or something similar in their own communities. And if this project didn't exist, how would things be different for you? I think that can be a really helpful reflective piece. And just again, a note to the impact that engagement has had for an individual. And just noting very finally here, what gives you hope for the future? About a year or so ago, I started including this question just in our general story gathering across CUF programmes on visits. And I felt this question particularly could be a really helpful theme and kind of thread through the different narratives, that hope for the future. And yeah, a real kind of uniting theme in people's stories, what it is that they want for their next step or for the next step for their community or for their project. So having a question that you consistently ask across a story gathering process can be really helpful to kind of tie in those themes. And also these questions, very much a suggestion, I think helpful to look at them sort of consider a semi-structured interview approach, and should people kind of really want to focus on something specific which has had impact, not feeling kind of constricted by a particular interview structure, but rather allowing that to develop as you gain some more further insights into individual stories and what it is that they really want to share when telling their own story. And just noting here for storytelling how the consent form checklist, and this is all included as well in that project planning guide, but just noting here the agreement to participate, an indication of whether an individual is comfortable being named in project stories, proposals, other communications, or if they prefer to remain anonymous. I think really helpful to include that with consideration of accessibility of the process as well. Consent for the story conversation to be audio recorded. While this isn't essential, it can be helpful for writing up. Through the storytelling process that I've done at CUF, there's a lot of different softwares available, but I find Otter AI is a really helpful software for transcribing. So if you are audio recording an interview using a software like that, can be really helpful for the transcription process and developing the final story write-up. A method for contact, if an update is needed, signature and date from the participant, and the capacity certainly to scan this consent form and store it in a secure place for future reference if required. And then just noting finally here, with safe space and participation, we always want to be considering safeguarding of both ourselves as story gatherers and also of any participants, guests, volunteers, individuals we're engaging with through this process. Consent and GDPR very much linked to story storage. Where is it that these write-ups will be held? Final sign-off of a story, and internally in CUF we use something called Dash. That can be a really helpful kind of internal central tool to save that final version, master copy of the story, to then be drawn on for different pieces. Sign off certainly from those who share their stories of that final master copy to ensure that this is co-produced process and people are aware of what it is we are taking forward in our active listening. And just a note here too, storytelling, when done well, can provide that opportunity to reflect on how far we've come, celebrate success and acknowledge a journey. And CUF recognises that when you're part of grassroots work, it would be a misuse of our position to keep such information to ourselves. Our culture is to share, amplify and proclaim all that we've seen and heard. So just, a note there. Some brilliant insights that individuals, guests and participants engaging with our projects have, and how is it that we can be gathering, capturing that voice and taking that to the ears of change makers, decision makers locally, further afield, to really influence the change that we want to see for those participants engaging with our projects.
Thank you, Sophie. That's been really, really helpful. And as I said, we will share the slides with you as well as a recording after this session so that you've got some more time to reflect on those and on the helpful tips that Sophie has shared there. I also just wanted to draw your attention to a number of CUF resources that I think link quite well to this theme of storytelling. Sophie's already mentioned our project planning and fundraising guide, and that has a section on evaluating your project's impact, which includes information and advice around story gathering and telling the story of your project, whether that's to celebrate with the local stakeholders or perhaps for applying for funding to expand or extend your project. And so a number of the tools that Sophie mentioned are in the project planning and fundraising guide. We also have a guide to exploring asset-based community development that was written by Reverend Al Barrett, who some of you may know of. And that really helps churches think about shifting to an asset-based mindset. So a mindset that starts by looking for the opportunities, the gifts, the skills and the assets in our local neighbourhoods, and thinking about how stories can be at the heart of an asset-based approach to community development. And then finally, recently we launched a new resource about growing and encouraging participation, and one of the activities within that is a conversation card exercise. And so that's just a really great opportunity to use some conversation cards that look at a number of different themes to encourage people to have deeper conversations. So that's really about encouraging listening and relationships. But obviously there's also a story linked to that, because as we listen to each other and share some of our lives, we are sharing our story and hearing other people's stories at the same time. So those three resources are all on the CUF Knowledge Bank, and you can find other resources there from CUF, including Growing Good, which was mentioned earlier on. In Growing Good, it is a 7-session course for church small groups, helping churches to connect with the local community and to make a difference locally.